volume isn't always the answer. That right there shines a spotlight that it's not a volume issue. There's like something there that's broken. You've got to talk about efficiency. You create like a true learning and development culture. And then when you start doing that, you're like unlocking your talent pool. Do we see a future where that whole early stage in the process is going to be like AI driven, and then the recruiter craftsmanship is going to be much more about the engagement, the selling, the closing, the experience, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? That's like the three main channels that you would evaluate. Nowhere on there is internal mobility.
Good morning, Ken. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Good to see you, Chris.
Absolutely. Well, thanks a lot for taking the time out to have a chat today. I'm sure the audience are going to really take value from this discussion. I guess, first of all, we know each other, but it'd be really great to start with a brief intro of you and what you're doing. You're currently at Robinhood, so it'd be great to know a bit about you and your role there.
Yeah. So I've been at Robinhood now for probably going on almost 2 years. It's probably a year and a half right now. I'm one of the senior talent acquisition leaders on the team. So our recruiting team now is probably just under 100 people. And then within the recruiting team, we've got a select handful of senior folks that are comprised of what we call like the talent acquisition leadership team. So I'm on that squad. I've been here for a year and a half, and I've worn a lot of different hats. The current hat I wear is I oversee our coordination team, and then I operate cross-functionally to be the voice of TA when it comes to certain initiatives that we're working with our cross-functional partners, comp, people, partners, et cetera. So I'm very involved in like global processes and et cetera as well. So.
Awesome. And, for those that don't know your history, you've been in and around talent for over a decade, working with some of the most exciting technology businesses in the world. And prior to Robinhood, you were, the co-owner and executive at Binc, which was one of the Bay Area's premier talent consultancies. Before you were acquired by Robinhood. So you've been around, you've seen a lot, and you've seen a ton of change when it comes to talent acquisition and everything that's going on in this world. And one of the things that you're an absolute expert at is building high performance recruiting teams, and really teams that can partner with stakeholders and companies through growth. And that's something that's really hard to do. So it'd be really interesting to get a sense of how you think about building high performing recruitment teams in today's world, and from your perspective, how that's changed over the last decade that you've been in the industry.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up my prior life pre Robinhood, which was helping run Binc with a couple of partners who happened to be my great friends. So it was a crazy ride that we had for 10 years, running Binc, first as an agency and then evolving to an RPO, and then we're like an advisory practice too as well. So I mean, my prior life before that, it was I was an attorney. And so when I got into recruiting, it was first legal recruiting. So I came from the agency background into the recruiting role. And so many, as you know, and then as many of the people who are probably listening to this who've been in the agency world, the agency world is like full desk responsibilities, right? So you got to hunt, you got to you eat what you're able to like hunt down, right? So it's a very different culture than what I started experiencing in the in-house world. Now that I'm in-house, but I also had a lot of friends that were operating in-house and trying to like compare and contrast the two. It feels like 10 years ago, there's a huge divide between agency approach and in-house approach. And I bet you that divide was even wider 15 to 20 years ago. What I've seen is there's more of a merger that's happening a little bit in terms of like recruiting and performance expectations and the things that you build as a recruiting leader to help fuel and support the individuals in the org to be able to perform up to the expectations that are required. So when we were building Binc, we focused a lot on the ability to to find candidates and then to basically get them through the process with velocity to deliver the hires that our clients were hungry for. And in many ways, when you're in that environment, you're able to be just focused on that aspect of what you are doing. What I've realized now living it firsthand is when you're in-house at a company, there are so many other responsibilities that the TA org has to carry, both at the leadership level and the even the individual contributor level, because now you're embedded in your matrix across so many different cross-functional partners and change management components that's happening. Sometimes it's hard to focus on performance because you're looking left and right, up and down, because you've got so many other responsibilities on your plate, right? So one thing that we focused a lot on Binc was because most recruiting works, you're going to measure standard pass-through rates, right? Everyone thinks about like pass-through rates from the waterfall down. Like, what are you getting from your recruiter screen to phone screen on-site to offer, et cetera, et cetera. But not a lot of organizations think about it from the context of the pass-through rates relative to the bookends. Meaning, like, how many candidates does it take for you to recruit a screen to then bottom out to the hire, right? That's like the efficiency metric, and everything in between you can kind of play around with a little bit, right? So to your question about how we want to start approaching it within our company at Robinhood is, and this ties to kind of what I was saying about like volume isn't always the answer sometimes, right? Because if you're trying to build a high performing recruiting organization, you've got to talk about efficiency. So like there is a narrative about understanding what is the bookend of your conversions, and then really diagnosing and dissecting what is contributing to solid bookend pass-through rates, or what's like making it too long so that you have a very inefficient process. And sometimes the efficiencies come down to things as simple as what % of time is your recruiting org able to spend in a given week relative to the actual performance of engaging with candidates and moving through the process versus other stuff that's on their plate as well, right? So there's a lot of things to play around with that we're just like starting to unpack right now within our company.
Yeah, it's super interesting because sometimes the recruiting org can actually be doing too much volume for the business to handle interviews and feedback and candidate experience, and that not only doesn't get the end result, but it damages the brand also, which has a knock-on effect that maybe isn't felt immediately, but maybe down the line. So that's really interesting. Have you, Joe, in that kind of journey of trying to drive efficiency and get those bookend numbers, I guess what you're trying to do is get less candidates needed at the top of the funnel to get higher, is the ultimate goal, right? And if that was 1 to 1 hire, that would be the best result ever. I'm not sure that'll ever happen. But is there anything that you've found that is a consistent theme in organizations, especially high growth technology, that stops companies being effective, or as efficient as they'd like to be?
Yeah, it's the it's the concept of I'll break it down to the average individual contributor recruiter, right? And when I say average, I mean the masses of individuals that you have within your organization, where if their behavior is if they learn the recruiting art form, right? Because when you first get into recruiting, it's a brand new thing, and you may be coached by volume. Numbers, because that's kind of pulled from like the sales world, right? But if you start early with someone who's entering the profession and really focus on them helping embrace the concept of like quality, and when I say quality, I mean not just measuring like how many outbounds you did a week, not just measuring how many how many candidates you have active, but truly measuring the efficiency of start to end. And measuring that, it changes the narrative with how that recruiter is going to conduct their day-to-day workload. And it's going to change the narrative with how you partner with your clients as well. I can vividly remember many times during our days running Binc where a client would say as well, we need more volume. We need more volume. We're not making hires. And I'm sure you know this narrative like quite well running Talentful. But when you sit down, let's say with the business leader or the founder or someone that's like, influential, and you show data that you all have talked to 80 candidates, and I'm using this as like an example, right? That's an exaggeration. Um, and we haven't made one offer yet, right? That right there shines a spotlight that it's not a volume issue. There's like something there that's broken in either the target candidate profile, the interview process vetting them, or even the sell component of it. Um, most what I've seen through the years is it's very easy, especially when you work in house at a company and you're representing like a highly visible company that you're working for, that a lot of people want to work for, right? So in those types of environments where talent is coming to you and knocking on your door to want to work there, um, it's very easy for the recruiting org and the average recruiter to get buried in that volume and start just kind of like operating like a machine and just like getting people from point A to point B to point C, but really not seeing the bookends of what they're trying to achieve through that process. And that's I've seen when that happens, there's a mismatch of expectations between what the TA organization is trying to deliver versus what the expectations of the business that we're serving is trying to receive on that end.
Talentful provides flexible recruiting solutions to the world's most ambitious companies. Are you thinking about ways to add flexibility to your talent function? With recent market volatility and hiring set to return to growth mode in the near future, there's never been a better time to choose the right partner to help you scale. Talentful's embedded sourcing, recruiting, coordination, and talent advisory services have been trusted by the world's leading brands. Companies such as Atlassian, Microsoft, Expedia, Pinterest, Waymo, and more. Whether you're hiring across engineering, go-to-market, or G&A, Talentful has got you covered. To find out how Talentful can help you, visit talentful.com. Absolutely. I mean, I've definitely seen that before where you're in a really high-profile, prestigious business that's getting a ton of inbound. But when you actually compare, like you said, the bookends and the efficiency from inbound applications versus sourced, it's miles apart. And actually, the business would be much better off focusing their energy and time on source candidates because it's going to generate, X times more better results. But there's also then the challenge of the candidate experience of those people that are coming towards you, and what you do to solve for that. So that's really interesting. And I guess one of the things that you mentioned is people coming from agency and having that agency experience is maybe on one end of the spectrum in terms of how performance is driven and really about numbers and quite harsh and pretty brutal in terms of how that's managed. But finding some kind of middle ground internally where you're still driving performance and numbers and metrics matter, but maybe in a more interesting and valuable way they're used. How do you go about, balancing that line on just setting expectations across the recruiting organization without you feeling like kind of meaningless KPIs? Because I think there's sometimes the notion that if you implement any form of KPI internally, it's like, oh, we're just like a recruitment agency, when actually KPIs are incredibly useful and can help recruiters become better and become more strategic. How do you go about that?
Yeah, we've got we have offer extend KPIs for obviously folks in our organization that are sourcers, and then we also have offer accept KPIs for recruiters within our organization. And these numbers were not just kind of like made up where we think, oh, this is reasonable. These numbers are actually directly correlated to our capacity model within our organization to then determine what we as an organization should be in terms of size and shape in order to hit the volume of hires over a certain period of time that our business leaders need across all different functions, right? So that to us is kind of like table stakes, right? And we know that there's like nuances, etc., relative to those table stakes, but it's critical as like talent acquisition leaders, even down to the managers and even down to quote unquote people that are leads, that everybody knows what their offer extend and or offer accept KPIs are. And it's going to be the responsibility of those different pockets to help support and coach their team through the achievement of that. What's interesting about when you set a KPI, sometimes it's too late, but when you catch it, if someone's exceeding or not exceeding, you're kind of like too late, right? In the whole process, it's almost like the equivalent of, I always kind of equate it to, if you look at a telescope, right, and you see a star that's like millions of miles away, what you see was like what the star looked like millions of years ago, right? So when you're looking at a scoreboard and a data sheet and someone's like doing XYZ, that's the result of activity that they're doing probably months ago, or not doing months ago. And so the other side of the fence is going to be, how do you catch that? How do you catch that sooner? And I think a lot of people have different methodologies. I'm a fan of looking number of active candidates. I think it's important for to be able to evaluate and look at a recruiter's pipeline and be able to kind of see the number of candidates they have and the distribution they have of those candidates at different stages in the funnel. Because if you can kind of like create a mass with that and believe that it's kind of moving through, then you'll be able to catch whether or not they're hitting their bottom line KPI sooner than just kind of like looking at it. Because by the time you catch it at the tail end, and if they're not meeting expectations, it's going to take another month or two, maybe even 3 months to even like rebuild it to like getting back to where you need it to be.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I love that analogy as well. Yeah, if you know your average conversion rates and offer acceptance rates, if there's a certain amount of active candidates, on deck per week, then you have a pretty high likelihood that you're going to get results. Yeah, so that makes total sense. And you've seen lots of different talent functions. You've hired hundreds of recruiters, over the last decade, and seen those shifts. What do you think separates the best recruiting organizations from average ones? What do you think really differentiates?
Oh, wow. Think about it. So I would have said historically things like culture, team support, those types of concepts. But I feel like a lot of those things, especially with highly visible companies with talent acquisition departments that have a good reputation, those are kind of like table stakes now, right? So the ones that I've observed that stand out in my mind are the ones that they take a lot of pride in the recruiting craft. And what I mean by that is, and again, I'll compare and contrast what you learn at an agency when you start off, and then maybe if you start off in recruiting, you go to a company with already like a very highly visible, attractive brand, right? The craft of recruiting, because recruiting by nature, if you look at the definition of recruiting, your job is to share a compelling value proposition to the target candidate that you are trying to recruit for. Your job is to create a compelling personal experience through the process that is almost a sell at each point of the way, while providing as much objectivity as possible. And then your job is to help coach and advise the candidate as they get toward the tail end about the opportunities and to weigh the pros and cons. Like that's like the craft of recruiting, right? Whereas in some environments, the ones that I've observed at some companies who can kind of get away with it, they can adopt more of a transactional approach and still be okay with their results because people want to work there, right? And so the ones that have a highly visible brand that people want to work for, and are like really take a lot of pride in the craftsmanship and the art of the recruiting, I'll call it recruiting game, those kind of stand out. That's almost like the double-headed dragon if you can provide that experience, because now your recruiting craftsmanship and art is really stands out, and the people want to work there too as well.
Yeah. I guess that's why, and in my experience, sometimes people that come from recruiting organizations that are huge, really well-known brands, like the fan companies, you have to be really careful when you're interviewing those people. There's obviously some really great people at those organizations, but you can become complacent in that recruiting
Correct.
craft in those companies because, they pay really, really well. Their comp package is really, really high in terms of percentile of the market, and they have a great brand that everyone wants to work with. So as a recruiter, you don't maybe have to do as much of that convincing and storytelling and negotiating as you would do in a more unknown business. So that's one of those things out there that I think big brand names don't necessarily equal competence all the time in recruiting. And I guess where do you think recruiting's been accelerating at such a fast pace in the last 5 years? Things are changing all the time, whether it's technology, the ways that we're working, the tools. Where do you think the next big innovation is going to come from? And how do you think that's going to change a leader's job in a recruitment capacity, or how can they leverage that innovation?
Yeah. I was lucky enough to have been able to attend the LinkedIn Talent Connect conference last week. And I've gone to those for a few years now, and obviously COVID stopped it. And I always enjoy going to those because there's always like some element where you leave and you walk away from about like industry trends, etc. Years ago, AI and tools were pretty big. Obviously, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and how that was kind of making its way into our space. This year, those topics were there, but it was interesting. There was less about AI and tools, and the topics that seemed to be like the big headlines was future work, not surprisingly, right? And the concept of internal mobility as well. That was a very big topic, the concept of internal mobility, and how companies need to think about their not only the pool of talent that's out there to kind of bring in, but the pool of talent that they currently have as well, and how to create like career mobility opportunities for those folks. So to answer your question and to kind of piece it together, we are in an interesting time right now, I think, with the way the market is, and tech companies getting, I guess, back to, it's almost kind of like a state of reset is kind of the best way to describe it, right? The days of like growing super fast and then getting your headcount to be like XYZ way larger than it needs to be in order to deliver like the basic principles of whatever product or feature that your company is core in delivering in the market. The market is showing that those days are behind us right now, right? Some companies are ahead of the curve in doing that, and other companies are kind of going to catch up. Which, I believe 2023 we're going to be like it's going to feel like a ping pong ball at the bottom throughout the calendar year. And so the trend, to your question about like the next few years, even though there will be like more of a supply of talent in the market for these companies, in talking to other like talent leaders I know in my community, there is this thread about like the concept of internal mobility and what people can kind of be doing to retain their talent. Because the reality is, when you think of a pipeline of hires that comes through a set of job recs, right? Yeah, the distribution has historically been sourced candidates, referrals, and applicants inbound, right? That's like the three main channels that you would evaluate. Nowhere on there is internal mobility. I wouldn't be surprised if that becomes a fourth category where companies set that as being a target, which many companies I think already do, but actually be more pronounced within the TA org. Most TA orgs don't associate internal mobility as being a pipeline that they put like a % higher target for the calendar year.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Right. I think that'll be one. And then the AI side, I can add to this, but I was talking to a buddy, and then I've been following a little bit. I'm starting to follow if you're following the the Gen AI movement, which is like generative artificial intelligence, right? And AI for us at this stage within recruiting and other industries, it's more like machine learning, recommendation, relevance matching, right? Um, but this generative AI stuff is actually pretty interesting because you're starting to see like companies that are building platforms where other businesses can kind of like use those platforms and create like verticals on top. And there's companies that are trying to adopt generative AI, especially in the sales and marketing role, to like generate content. And it's kind of got me wondering, like, what is the opportunity for generative AI within the recruiting ecosystem? Because when you think of our funnel, right, our the way recruiting works, especially on the outbound side, what are the points that talent acquisition has to like generate content through our steps and process? It's the outbound email. And there's tools now that help with the sequencing of outbound emails, right? But the content that's being loaded in those is still done by, human beings. So I'm wondering, like, is that going to make its way into our space? But we're so far behind the way like sales and marketing thinks about the funnel. Like recruiting is like, there's a huge gap in terms of how about the methodology and science that we adopt relative to sales and marketing. So just kind of wonder, do we see a future where that whole early stage in the process is going to be like AI driven, and then the recruiter craftsmanship is going to be much more about the engagement, the selling, the closing, the experience, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
You've got to imagine, like, just knowing what we know about sourcing and the repetitiveness and just how it's can be sequenced and automated. And like you said, if there was something that could create those like really high quality content along the way, you could effectively really replace the sourcing element, or at least a large part of that. So that's got to be the next step. I think it'll be really hard to replace the craftsmanship as you're talking about and the relationship building, but there's no reason the technology can't replace that sourcing part. So I think that's, in my mind, has to be the next big thing that changes in recruiting. And I think a lot of recruiters might be happy about that too, to be honest. To be freed up to do, the work they probably enjoy the most, and that's the people element, and selling and building those relationships. Let's looking forward to keeping our finger on the pulse there. And I know you guys at Robinhood are working on some really exciting things, whether it's like early stage talent and how you're building that in the recruiting org or other things that you're doing. What would you say is the most exciting or impactful thing your team is working on right now?
Ooh. So we're in the planning process stage right now for 2023, right? So we're working within TA and then with our key cross-functional partners, so that we have a unified roadmap for 2023. And that's the stuff on there is probably no different than what you would see with any other companies, where efficiency, processes, tools, all those sorts of things, and then making sure that you establish like a certain hiring bar, etc. I talked about this earlier, but the project that I'm actually really interested in, that I'm helping out with, is the concept of internal career mobility. And then also I'm very passionate about that. And the reason I'm passionate about that is because even though right now within the industry there's like an excess supply of talent for companies because of what's happened, I think we'll get back to a state where companies will still feel pinched for talent supply in the market. I mean, the truth of the matter is technology companies just grow at an exponential pace, right? It's so much faster than how our educational system and like everything just like pumps out talent for people with their requisite skills. So there's always, the gap is going to continue to form. And so the idea of the idea of a company, and I'm passionate about this within Robin, and I'm trying to sell this idea and vision. So, but the idea of a company not only being a place for people to go and work, but imagine if a company like embraced the idea of like being a university too, as well, to like help individuals not only like go there and you contribute, but you can really develop skills, not only in what you're doing, but like in other facets. You create like a true learning and development culture. And then when you start doing that, you're like unlocking your talent pool, because the cost to acquire new talent, I mean, I don't know math of this, but I would imagine the cost to acquire and find new talent, train them, et cetera, is a lot higher than the cost to create a culture where you can just like nurture the talent you have and then move them around.
That's such an awesome idea. It solves so many issues and also creates a much better experience for the employees. I mean, and I think companies, specifically in high growth, tend to have a leaning towards hiring people with potential and aptitude and the right behaviors. And so once you've got those people and this is a Robinhood person, or this is a Talentful person, or this is a Google person, if that person shows an interest somewhere else, then most likely they're going to be successful given the right tools. So I think that's an awesome idea. It brings up lots of questions in my head around the L&D function and how robust that would have to be and how interesting that could be made. But it's super exciting. I would love to chat to you about this forever, and you've just sparked off loads of ideas in my own mind. That was really, really awesome. Thanks for spending the time, and I'm sure we'll see each other in maybe another podcast recording soon.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, thanks for having me, Chris. Had fun.